Welcome back to the race weekend. Congress is set to return this week, and there is a lot on the agenda for lawmakers in the coming days. House managers will present impeachment charges against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Support for Israel and Ukraine are still hotly contested, and Speaker Johnson faces a potential motion to vacate. Lawmakers in both parties and both chambers are calculating ways to maintain control once voters head to the polls later this year. So what can you expect to see from Congress in the coming days? Our Inside the Race panel with Politico is here to discuss. From Politico, we have congressional reporter Nicholas Wu. From Scripps News, we have congressional correspondent Nate Reed and political analyst Steve Schmidt. Steve is also the founder of the Warning newsletter and on Substack and podcast. Steve, let's start with you. Impeachment charges against Alejandro Mayorkas. How would you say he's doing in his role as the head of Homeland Security?
Well, look, I think that there's a lot of legitimate criticism for the head of Homeland Security because of the situation at the border right now. But there's absolutely no grounds, no evidence of any type whatsoever to impeach the man. So it's all political theater. It's a carnival of stupidity that is exacerbating the real crisis on the southern border. And I think the American people look at it and they see it exactly for what it is, that this is Kabuki Theater. Kabuki Theater of the extremely stupid type. And I think that it's part of the reason why the House majority is in such tenuous circumstances for MAGA Republicans.
And Nicholas, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is expected to dismiss the charges against Mayorkas. What could Republicans do next?
Well, I think all eyes are going to be on how many senators are actually in the chamber next week, since Majority Leader Schumer emphasized in a letter to colleagues today that attendance next week is going to be extremely important. Dismissing the charges can come by a simple majority, but things happen with senators. Folks are sick, they miss flights, and there could be a situation where Democrats might not even have the votes to dismiss. So I think that is something that senators are going to keep an eye on next week.
Another story that we'll be following, Nate, as I bring you in, the effort to potentially oust Speaker Mike Johnson. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has threatened a motion to vacate. How likely is it that Johnson could lose his job?
Well, look, a couple of factors at play here. For one, Congress returns this coming Tuesday. Once they do, that's the first opportunity for someone to actually bring up that motion to remove Speaker Johnson. Now, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene brought this up right before Congress left on this current recess. She said, look, this is effectively something I'm filing away for the future. It's a pink slip, if you will, to Mike Johnson, saying that I could at any time try and oust him as Speaker of the House. Now, remember what happened to Kevin McCarthy. All it took was 8 Republicans, remember the margins have narrowed in Congress since then, 8 Republicans and all Democrats voting to remove Speaker McCarthy to oust him from his job, becoming the first Speaker of the House to be ousted in American history by a motion to vacate. That could very well happen to Mike Johnson. Again, all it's going to take would be just a handful of Republicans and all Democrats voting to remove Speaker Mike Johnson. Now, while Marjorie Taylor Greene has not made clear what timeline she's working with here, how soon she could vote to oust him, a lot is going to hinge on what he decides to do on everything from FISA reform, on dealing with the question of sending additional aid to Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific. Those are all areas that are contentious for the House Republican Conference. And if he makes moves that a number of Republicans, especially conservative Republicans, members of the House Freedom Caucus, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, not a member of the House Freedom Caucus, but still a conservative Republican, if he does things to upset that slim Republican majority, he could very well have his job on the line. And that's not a situation that Republicans or Democrats, that being said, really want to find themselves in again. Remember that leadership crisis from last fall, weeks and weeks without a speaker while lawmakers struggled to coalesce around a single candidate. That candidate was Mike Johnson. It's been about 6 months on the job. The question is, can he be speaker for much longer? That's something we really won't know till they show up in Washington this coming week.
Now, Steve, let's step out. Let's look at Congress as a whole, because polling shows that Americans overwhelmingly do not have a favorable view of Congress and the work being done or the work that's not being done. How could that dissatisfaction impact which party actually controls the House and the Senate as we get closer to November?
Well, this is an age-old issue, right? That people can't stand the Congress, but they tend to vote for their congressman or woman for re-election. We live in a country where overwhelmingly members of Congress sit around and draw the lines on the maps, picking their voters as opposed to voters picking their congressmen. So before we even start, most of these races already settled. They're overwhelmingly Democratic districts or they're overwhelmingly Republican districts because of the gerrymandering, because of the way those lines are drawn. But you know, there'll be 30 to 35 competitive House races that will determine the majority. And there's just no argument that the House Republicans can make that they have run the institution. It's been a cuckoo's nest. And so they have run the place as if it's an asylum. And I think the American people are certainly not going to say, hey, 2 more years for you guys. So it's a 1-seat majority now functionally, right? Flies up there, and the American people are likely to do what they've been doing, which is serially switching power back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. So probably, you know, we're looking at in November to see a narrow Democratic majority in the next Congress, and we'll see how that functions. Probably a little bit better because you don't have the same sort of nihilism, but it's a broken institution, and the American people understand that.
What will it take to change that?
Well, you know, Winston Churchill observed something about democracy. He said it was the worst form of government except all of its alternatives. He also observed that, you know, in a democracy, the people get the government they deserve. You know, there has to be a significant era of reform and renewal in the country, and people have to demand change, real change. And when people demand real change, you'll get real change. If you elect a Congress full of Lauren Boeberts and Marjorie Taylor Greenes, which you see taking place in a lot of districts over the country, you're going to get a Congress full of Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Lauren Boeberts. We also have to look at the media in the country. Why is it that everybody knows who Marjorie Taylor Greene is and Lauren Boebert is, but has no idea who Abigail Spanberger is, has no idea who the members are who are experts in nuclear proliferation, for example? So we have this lowest common denominator politics where, you know, the media fuels it like a reality show, and voila, you get what we get. We're going to need changes in the media, changes in the electorate, changes in the country.
And Nicholas, you had some reporting this week about a group of House progressives circulating a letter to President Biden and Secretary of State Antony Blinken asking them to halt weapon transfers to Israel. How would you characterize the issue of U.S. military aid to Israel for congressional Democrats right now?
It's been a particularly contentious topic for Democrats. We've seen the cleavages in the party over the last month since the start of the war between Israel and Hamas. Progressives in particular have been resistant to sending more weapons to Israel without conditions. And we've seen this highlighted since the killing of World Central Kitchen workers earlier this week by Israel. And this is something that's really outraged progressives. Folks I've talked to have signaled that there would be a significant number of progressives who could vote against a standalone Israel aid package, which is something that Speaker Johnson has indicated he might put on the floor. Now, the question is, would there be enough Republicans to make up the difference? And that is something that you know, all the very skilled vote counters on Capitol Hill are going to have to figure out as leaders in both parties try to figure out a way to get a package for Israel, a package for Ukraine across the finish line.
Yeah, and speaking of a package for Ukraine, Nate, I will turn to you. When could we see an aid package for Ukraine actually brought to the House floor?
It could very well be coming during this current work period. Remember, Congress has been out of town for the last 2 weeks. They're in town now for 2 weeks. The question is, will they bring up that aid package to Ukraine? Speaker Johnson says that they might. The question is also, what form is that package going to take? Is that a forgivable loan to Ukraine? That's something that former President Trump and his allies have been somewhat pushing, mulling over. That's something that Speaker Johnson sounds at least open to. You also have to remember the kind of dissension that Speaker Johnson will face. There's a lot of Republicans, Marjorie Taylor Greene included, who are not in favor of additional aid to Ukraine. They don't want any more money going out the door to Ukraine. There is a scenario where Speaker Johnson tries to pass additional aid to Ukraine and then relies on potentially Democratic support to save his speakership in order to get that Ukraine aid out the door. Some Democrats have floated the possibility of at least voting to table a question of whether to remove Speaker Johnson if he indeed supports additional aid to Ukraine. Look, that's a very real possibility. And then there's the question of what's it paired with? If it's Ukraine and Israel aid together, they could have real difficulties, as Nick just said, with some of those congressional Democratic progressives who are sounding less and less open to sending more aid to Israel right now, especially given what we've seen in Gaza. So again, there's a lot of questions. We're going to have to wait to see what Speaker Johnson wants to do. But again, a lot of this comes down to Speaker Johnson. The Senate has already acted. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, both supportive of additional aid to Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific. The question now really rests with Speaker Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House. Question is, how much longer will he be Speaker? And furthermore, will he put additional aid to Ukraine on the floor? And what is that package going to look like?
Yeah, so many storylines for the week and weeks ahead. Nicholas, Nate, Steve, that is all the time that we have for now. Thank you for joining us and for your insight.